The kid was standing next to a large wooden coffin, holding a small car that his father had given him just a month ago. People in the hall whispered softly, wiped away tears, but the 2-year-old child seemed not to notice anything around him. He did not understand. He did not know what death was, that his father would never enter the house again. But something in his behavior was alarming. All the time he stretched his hand forward, pointing to the same point on the coffin, as if trying to explain something very important. His mother stood beside her, pale, haggard, with a blank stare. She tried to calm her son, lowered his hand, but the baby stubbornly raised it again and again, pointing to the same place. At first it seemed like an accident, just a childish habit, but by the middle of the ceremony it became clear that he saw or felt something there that escaped the attention of adults. When the boy once again stood on tiptoe and poked his finger at the side of the coffin, the grandmother said in a trembling voice, He has been doing this for the 3rd day. He showed this at home when we were preparing the body." Her mother turned to her, but said nothing. She herself tried not to think about that strange behavior of the child. But now, in front of people, it could no longer be written off as an accident. Several people came closer. Someone tried to joke, like, "It is difficult to explain such moments to children." But the baby suddenly began to knock on the board with a small palm. Not loudly, but persistently, and immediately he staggered back, as if frightened by their own actions. His eyes, large and moist, were filled with anxiety. He looked back at his mother and he uttered a few words in a choked voice. It is not quite clear, as 2-year-olds can do, but everyone heard, "Dad is here." His mother turned even paler. Her breath caught in her throat. "What? I?" someone asked from behind. But the child only shook his head and pointed to the same point again. Now everyone has noticed it is, where he was pointing, there was a thin, barely noticeable scratch on the surface of the coffin, as if something had hit from the inside. Yes, this was not seen under the flowers, wreaths, and fabric. One of the men, the best friend of the deceased, frowned. Maybe it was scratched during the transfer, but the woman from the funeral service shook her head confidently. The coffin was in perfect condition and they checked before taking it out. Meanwhile, the baby began to get nervous, pulled his mother by the dress and whispered again, "Daddy." These words broke through the silence like thunder. People looked at each other, some with disbelief, some with fright. The mother knelt down in front of her son, hugged him, trying to understand at least something of his confused sounds. But he repeated, only the same thing, "Dad is awake. Daddy, I." It became so quiet that you could hear someone dropping a handkerchief on the floor. His mother's heart beat so hard that it seemed that everyone would hear him. Panic rose inside her, a terrible thought that she had been chasing away from herself all these days. And suddenly the doctors made a mistake. Suddenly something happened that she did not even want to think about. She stood up and said in a trembling voice, "Open the coffin." Someone tried to stop her, saying that she was in shock. She couldn't be so worried. But the mother was adamant, and the child, hearing her words, seemed to calm down a little and snuggle up to her leg, not taking his eyes off that very point on the coffin. And at this moment, when 2 men had already come up to take pictures, a strange, barely perceptible sound was heard in the hall, as if a dull jolt from within. People screamed, and the child suddenly escaped from his mother's arms, ran up to the coffin and, pointing his finger, loudly and clearly, shouted, "Dad!" And no one could pretend that they had not heard it, so the men standing by the coffin froze. No one seemed to dare to take the first step, as if fear had paralyzed the air in the hall. People crowded closer, but kept their distance. Everyone wanted to see, but no one wanted to get too close if the truth turned out to be worse than any guess. The baby's mother stood pale but firm. Even as her hands trembled, her gaze was fixed only on the lid of the coffin. She no longer tried to explain what was happening. Everything she felt now was a mixture of desperate hope and animal terror. The child clung to her legs, as if pushing her. "Mom, open it. Dad there." Finally, one of the men, the best friend of the deceased, took a deep breath and said, "If there is even the slightest chance, we must be convinced." The funeral agent tried to object, but when he saw the baby reach for the coffin again, he raised his hand and, pointing to the same point, gave up. He took off the flowers, threw back the cloth, carefully checked the fastening. The hall became even quieter. The silence was such that you could hear someone holding back sobs. The men made an effort. The lid began to give way with a heavy creak. Everything happened slowly, as if every centimeter brought them closer to the terrible truth. The child suddenly stopped crying. He looked directly at the coffin, as if he knew what he was about to see. When the lid was finally raised, the people instinctively stepped back. But what they saw was not what they expected. The man's body lay exactly as it should be, but the face looked different. Restless, unquiet. It was distorted. Her lips were parted, and a strange tension appeared on her forehead. And most importantly, his right hand was slightly offset, as if he was trying to lift it. When the mother saw this, her legs buckled. He was put that way. His friend barely whispered. The funeral agent shook his head sharply. No. We laid our hands symmetrically. Both were folded on their chests. The words echoed on everyone standing nearby. The baby wriggled out of his mother's arms and looked inside. His face was not frightened. On the contrary, a strange confidence appeared in him. He poked his finger at his father's hand and said confidently, "He wanted to knock." Dad called. There were sobs from behind. Someone covered his mouth with his hand, trying not to scream in horror. His mother touched the cold hand with trembling fingers. Husband and noticed scratches on the inside of the lid, which no one had seen before. It was her voice that broke. He did it. A friend of the deceased ran his hand over the surface of the lid and felt obvious traces, burrows left by his nails. He really could not finish, but suddenly from the crowd came the voice of an old man, a neighbor of the family. I said that it was necessary to check again. He wasn't sick. He was a healthy man. His voice trembled, but there was rage in it. How was it possible to declare death without a second examination? Mother swayed as if she were standing on the deck of a sinking ship. Her heart was beating with ragged thrusts. For a second, she imagined how her husband, still alive, woke up in the dark, tried to call, knock, and no one heard. An excruciating wave of guilt rose up in her chest that could crush anyone. But the little one suddenly took her hand, put her fingers to his cheek, and whispered, "Daddy isn't mad." Dad said, "Mom, don't cry." His mother gave him a look full of shock. "He told you." The kid nodded very confidently as a 2-year-old child can nod when he does not yet understand that his words break the reality of adults. The funeral agent finally pulled himself together and said, "We have to call the police and a doctor. This is an emergency." But before anyone could make a call, 2 people stood motionless, a mother and a child. Tot. He held her hand and kept looking at his father's body not with horror, but as if he saw something that was hidden from everyone else. And at that moment, the mother realized that her son was not just pointing to the coffin. He was hearing things that no one else had heard, even when his father was still alive. The mother sat on a chair, holding her son tightly to her. While chaos reigned around, someone called an ambulance, someone in the police, someone tried to take people out of the hall who could no longer look at the open coffin. But all this seemed to be happening in the distance. She heard sounds but could not distinguish words. Her whole world narrowed down to the little boy in her arms and that motionless body a few steps away from her. The child suddenly stopped fidgeting, raised his head and looked into the void, as if he saw something that was inaccessible to others. His gaze rested directly on his father's body. "Dad, here," he said quietly but surely. The mother shuddered. "Where, baby?" she whispered. But the child did not point his finger. He just stared ahead as if he saw the person who was standing next to them. Gradually, the hall began to empty. Only a few people remained, who were afraid to leave the woman with the child alone. The funeral agent walked from corner to corner, fiddling with his gloves in confusion. A family friend was leaning against the wall and looking at the floor. He still couldn't realize that his best friend. Perhaps he did not die when they thought he would. Suddenly, the baby got up from his knees again and went to the coffin. The mother called to him in fright, but the child stopped right at the edge, put his hand on the cold tree and said, "Dad says, thank you, Mom." It was as if an electric shock passed through the mother. She screamed, covering her mouth with her hand. No one knew what to say or do. A family friend approached, trying to take the boy away, but the child did not move. He looked at one point inside the coffin, as if someone were standing between him and his father. "He is no longer afraid," the kid said as calmly as if he was talking about a cartoon. "Dad is gone." These words, uttered by a child's voice, hung in the air, heavy, inexplicable, but strange, bright. Her mother felt something inside her let go, as if Gently's invisible hand had touched her heart, and let her breathe. A minute later, doctors and police officers burst into the hall. The check began. People asked questions, asked everyone to come out. But for the mother, the whole world seemed to slow down. She only saw her son standing there, no longer afraid, no more pointing, no longer crying. He just stood quietly, as if he had said goodbye. Doctors confirmed the terrible thing. The man did show signs of movement after the alleged death. But now, he was dead completely and without a doubt. When the lid was closed again, the boy said his last word, "Bye, Dad," and for the first time in these painful days. He turned and went to his mother himself without looking back, as if he knew it was really over now. His mother picked him up, pressed him to her and closed her eyes. A long road of pain, questions and investigations awaited them. But she felt one thing. Her husband, by some miracle, managed to say goodbye to her through his 2-year-old son.